The alarm tore through the station before I even opened my eyes, and by the time my boots hit the floor, the lights had already turned red. My name is Ethan Hale, and I was the only human on Valkyrie Station 9 when the containment field failed. I ran into the control deck still pulling my jacket on, and I found 6 Valkyrie crew members pressed against the far wall like the floor itself might swallow them. Their station chief, a tall woman named Ilra Sen, stood frozen with her 4 eyes locked on a single blinking light on the main console. "What happened?" I said. Nobody answered me. Nobody even looked at me. I grabbed the nearest crewman, a young man called Doran Vex, and shook his arm until his eyes finally focused on my face. "Ring 7, he said, his voice cracking. "The seal is down. The seal has held for 40 years, and now it is down." "What's in Ring 7? Ilra finally turned to face me, and I saw something in her expression I had never seen from her before. Not annoyance, not tiredness, but pure, bone-deep fear. "The Ashkun," she whispered. "3 of them. We locked that ring the year my mother was born, and we swore it would never open again." The lights flickered, and somewhere far below us, a heavy door groaned and gave way with a sound like grinding stone. Every Valkyrie on that deck flinched at once, as if the sound had physically struck them. "They will come up," Doran said. "They always said they would come up one day." I looked at the shaft door across the room, sealed with a manual lock that nobody had touched in decades. Then I looked at 6 trained adults standing frozen against a wall, too afraid to even reach for their communicators. "Somebody has to check it," I said. "No one goes near Ring 7, Ilra said. "No one has gone near Ring 7 in 40 years. "Well, somebody's about to," I said, and I walked toward the shaft door before anyone could stop me. Ilra grabbed my arm, her grip shaking. "You do not understand what is down there." "Then tell me." She opened her mouth and closed it again. No words came out. That told me everything I needed to know. She didn't actually know what was down there. None of them did. They only knew the fear their parents had handed down to them, sealed as tightly as that broken door. I pulled my arm free, grabbed a hand lamp from the wall, and stepped into the shaft before my own nerves could catch up with my decision. The drop was long, and the air grew colder with every level I passed. By the time I reached the bottom, my breath came out in pale clouds, and the silence pressed against my ears like water. Ring 7 had once been a farming section. That much was clear from the collapsed irrigation lines and the vines that had grown wild across broken machines. Dust covered everything in a thick gray layer, undisturbed for decades. My lamp beam swept across empty rows and rusted equipment, and for a moment, I thought the alert had been a false alarm. Then I heard it. A low, thin sound, almost like a whimper, coming from behind a collapsed support beam. My heart pounded harder than it had all night. I forced my legs forward, one slow step at a time, my lamp shaking slightly in my hand. I turned the corner, ready for anything. What I found stopped me cold, but not from fear. 3 creatures sat huddled together in the dark, each about the size of a large dog, their fur patchy, and their ribs showing clearly beneath thin skin. 6 wide eyes, pale gold in color, stared back at me, and every one of them was shaking. They were not lunging, they were not snarling. They were terrified, pressed together for warmth, the smallest one hiding almost completely behind the other 2. "You're not monsters," I said quietly, more to myself than to them. "You're just kids." I lowered myself onto an overturned crate, moving slowly, keeping my lamp pointed away from their eyes. My heart was still racing, but for a different reason now. I reached into my jacket and found a single ration bar, the only food I had brought with me. I broke off a small piece, placed it on my open palm, and stretched my arm out toward them, staying perfectly still. Minutes passed. The creatures watched me without moving, their breathing quick and shallow. I didn't rush them. I didn't speak again. I simply waited, my arm growing tired, my palm open in the cold air. Finally, the largest one crept forward, sniffing the air with obvious hesitation. It took one more step, then another, until its nose brushed against my fingers. It took the food so gently that I barely felt anything at all, and then it pressed its head into my palm, exactly the way a nervous dog might, hoping for comfort it hadn't felt in a very long time. I began to scratch behind what I guessed were its ears, and its whole body relaxed under my hand. The second creature crept closer, pushing its way in for the same attention, and then the third joined, until I was sitting in the dust of a forbidden ring, surrounded by 3 so-called monsters who only wanted warmth and kindness. That was when I heard the shaft door creak open far above me. "Ethan," Ilra's voice called down, thin and unsteady. "Are you alive?" "I'm alive," I called back, "and you need to see this." There was a long pause before her lamp beam appeared at the top of the shaft, swinging slowly as she began the climb down. I heard at least 2 other crew members following behind her, their footsteps hesitant on every rung. When Ilra finally reached the bottom, her lamp swept across the room and landed directly on me, sitting calmly, with 3 creatures resting against my legs, like tired children after a long day. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. "They're gentle," I said. "They're starving, and they're scared, but they're gentle." "That is not possible," she whispered. "The stories say they tore through steel. They say entire teams vanished in that ring." "When was the last time anyone actually saw one up close?" Ilra didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved between me and the creatures, searching for some explanation that made sense of what she was seeing. "Before my mother was born," she finally admitted. "No one alive has seen an Ashkun and lived to describe it. We only know the warnings. Warnings written by people who were probably just as scared as you," I said. "Fear like that doesn't need proof to keep going. It only needs silence, and 40 years is a long silence." Doran Vex stepped closer, his lamp trembling slightly in his hand. He studied the smallest creature, still tucked behind the other 2 despite my gentle scratching. Slowly, carefully, he crouched down a few feet away. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Move slow," I said. "Let it come to you." He extended his hand, palm open, exactly as I had done. The smallest creature watched him for a long moment, then finally crept forward, sniffing his fingers before allowing the same gentle touch behind its ears. Doran laughed, a sound full of disbelief and relief mixed together, and the tension in his shoulders melted away completely. More crew members arrived over the next several minutes, drawn by the sounds of quiet laughter instead of the screaming they had expected. Each one approached carefully, each one hesitated, and each one eventually knelt down beside the creatures, offering the same gentle patience I had shown at the very beginning. Ilra remained standing the longest, watching her crew slowly release a fear that had shaped their entire lives. When she finally knelt down herself, her hand shook as she reached toward the largest creature, but it leaned into her touch without hesitation, exactly as it had with me. 40 years, she whispered, running her fingers gently through its fur. 40 years we sealed this ring, and all along, there was nothing here but fear feeding on silence. Fear doesn't need a monster to survive, I said. It just needs a door that nobody's brave enough to open. Ilra looked up at me, her 4 eyes glistening in the dim light. You are either the bravest human I have ever met, or the most reckless. Probably both, I said, and for the first time that night, she actually smiled. The rescue team arrived shortly after, carrying proper supplies and enough food to finally end the creature's long hunger. As they ate, their tails, thin and almost forgotten-looking, began to move slowly back and forth, a small, simple sign of comfort, finally returning to bodies that had known nothing but fear and isolation for far too long. I stayed there in Ring 7, long after the others had gone to arrange proper care, sitting quietly with 3 creatures who had never harmed a single person. watching them finally rest without fear for what may have been the first time in their entire lives. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room isn't a monster at all. Sometimes it's simply a story that nobody ever dared to question, passed down through silence and shadow, until an entire station forgets there was ever a door that could be opened, and a hand that only needed to reach out.